Another thing that the UK and the US, and we're hearing it from other European nations, as a way of dealing with the economic crisis that we are in at the moment, is war. What is your opinion of the conflicts in particular between Russia and Ukraine, which the West are massively involved in, and of the one in Middle East? Just a sort of general opinion from Godfrey on what you think about those particular conflicts.
Well, one of the great problems that we have is that the drivers of warfare are in Washington, the neocons in Washington, because it's all about money. Most wars are about money, if you dig down. And of course, America is a military-industrial complex-driven, which Eisenhower warned about in 1960. America is all about arms manufacture and warfare. And this is the problem that you have. Ordinary people don't want war. Nobody wants a war. I don't want a war. You don't want a war. Ordinary people never want a war. But we get a relentless propaganda about who the next enemy is. It doesn't matter. So at the moment it happens to be Russia, which of course is absurd. The neocons started this war in the Ukraine quite deliberately. And of course, the billions of dollars that the Americans send to the Ukraine come straight back to the United States into the pockets of the industrial military complex and Congress, of course, who have been bought. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Ukraine or whether it's the Middle East or whether it's Iraq. It doesn't matter where it is. This is about money and the elite who are safe in their bunkers in Washington or London manipulating the situation. And I do not like it. I don't like it, and I don't like the fact that the German economy is in decline at the moment, and they are now putting millions and millions of euros into arms manufacture in Germany. Arms manufacture is no good. No good ever comes of war. No good hardly ever comes of warfare. Nobody really wins. So what we really need is peace, negotiation, and of course nobody's really offering that. This is the problem in the Ukraine, and it's only just come out. You and I knew about this at the very beginning, but when you listen to the BBC or CNN or CNBC, most people didn't know that there was a peace offer on the table in April of 2002, signed by Zelensky, signed by the Russians. It was a good deal for everybody. It was signed, and of course Boris Johnson went out there to scupper the deal. So we are now 300,000 young Ukrainian dead later. Boris, of course, is a war criminal, and we had this peace. We could have had this peace just a little while ago, just 18 months ago, and it's been rejected. And still, the neocons in Washington won't come to the table. Still, they're supporting Israel with bombs, cluster bombs, and missiles to dump on women and children in Gaza. That we've lost any form of moral dynamic now in the West. We used to think we were the superior beings in the West over the Soviet Union and communism and things. We have lost that now. We are no better than anybody else, and rather worse.
It actually really breaks my heart, Godfrey, because I always believed in British was good to be, cricket. That was good cricket. We're being English, and we were the good guys. And now it's quite clear and quite apparent. You mentioned Boris Johnson being a war criminal and squashing a peace deal that had been signed by Russia and Ukraine back in 2020. Putin has actually reiterated his desire to negotiate with the West and come to peaceful terms over Ukraine, which has been out of hand, rejected immediately in the last few days. Is that because our economies in the West have been so badly crushed because of the COVID era? And I don't want to talk about COVID. I've just done an hour on that. But could it be that the governments of the UK and the USA are like, how can we get out of this economic mess? How can we keep the system going a bit longer and squeeze as much profit as possible out of it? I know we will instigate wars in Europe, in the Middle East, maybe even in China in the very near future. And as a result, generate a war economy, which will be very, very profitable and keep everything afloat. It's almost reminiscent of the 30s. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yes, I think what they want is to be able to take the focus away from the way that the economies of the West have been mismanaged, and when they do default, they have to invent an enemy to take everybody's view out of the situation. But of course, it isn't as simple as that. Firstly, we now have the BRICS countries, which are extremely now sophisticated, well-armed and rich without any debt or without very little debt. I mean, Russian debt's only 20% of GDP. So consequently, these countries which haven't burdened themselves with debt are doing really quite well. So things aren't as simple as they used to be. And of course, our army now is down to about 50 or 60,000. And we've got people like Tobias Ellwood, who I think is mentally ill, talking about having a war with Russia. We can only put, and I tell you this as a professional, a retired professional soldier, we can only put three brigades in the field, army brigades, logistically properly supported. 3. Well, the Russians have got something like 200. You know, what are they talking about fighting with Russia? It's ludicrous. I used to do a little bit of boxing in the army. It's like me getting my gloves out of the attic and going and fighting Mike Tyson. It's not going to bloody happen, is it? It's ludicrous. But of course, we seem to be in a we've lost a free press. We've lost a free press. The BBC, Sky, CNBC, CNN, and all the rest of it are now all owned by deep state. They're all owned by the same people, so you can't have the truth. You won't get the truth on the BBC. You know, you won't, and most people listening to your channel, Darren, know that, which is why they probably stopped watching it. I mean, who watches the BBC these days? It's nonsense. It's rubbish. But of course, it's funded by deep state, isn't it? It's funded by the government. Don't pay the BBC, you go to prison. So the whole damn thing is run by the governments, Western governments, and we know it's uniparty. We know that there's no difference between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. We know that. There's no difference between Republicans and Democrats in North America. They all piss in the same pot.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there is a genuine determination for war with adversaries like China and in particular Russia? Russia's the one that gets the mainstream attention, at least at the moment. Do you think people like Tobias Ellwood are serious and have been instructed to push the war narrative because it is coming to our shores in the coming years? Do you think that is going to be, you know, an eventuality? Or are they just talking so they can generate some funds and some cash and some profit for their friends in the defense industry?
Well, I think they talk their book. It would be difficult to believe that there isn't some financial reward for the Boris Johnsons and the Tobias Ellwoods of this world in talking up the military book. And my guest on my channel was Colonel Douglas McGregor, which I'm sure some of your people will know, who say there's so many, almost every congressman now is beholden to the industrial military complex, and of course funded by a lot of Israeli money and Israeli influence in Congress. So we're not getting the ordinary man, what we would call the man on the Clapham omnibus, or the Americans would call Joe Sixpack, aren't getting the truth, but they're beginning to find out now how it works. But this talk about warfare with Russia, we armed the Ukrainian army, which is 500,000 strong at the very beginning, with the latest NATO kit, NATO training, limitless money, and they lost. They've lost. I mean, the war's now virtually over. So talking about a war with Russia is absurd because we couldn't conceivably win. They've got so much more sophisticated stuff. Their stuff works. Our stuff is more expensive, but it doesn't work. And if you look at a map and see how a war with China, there's billions of the buggers. You know, what would we do? How would we go about that? I mean, I've never heard of anything so ridiculous. No, what we've done in the past is had nice, tidy little wars with people who can't fight back. They're right that they got pointed sticks and all the rest of it, and they're sort of little. But now even the Houthis in the Yemen are sinking stuff. They've got missiles and stuff now. So the days of beating up the small boy in the yard and looking good have gone. So I don't quite know what's going to happen. But I think they're going to find that war is. We can't go to war. We've got no army. We've got a ridiculous navy with an aircraft carrier which has been withdrawn and going somewhere safer, because you could sink aircraft carriers in 2 minutes with fairly modest kit or modest electric submarines. They were all right at Okinawa, but I mean they've been an anachronism, Darren, for years. Aircraft carriers, ridiculous, great things, which will be sunk in less than a week in the South China Sea if we went to war with China. And people who've taken interest in things know these things, but of course our politicians don't, because in the main, 99% of our politicians are incredibly stupid or corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an ex-Navy man myself, not a sailor, but I worked in the Devonport Royal Dockyard for 15 years on our surface fleet platform and our nuclear subs. And I was all, my family and Navy, my dad's dad, and so on were all Navy. And so, like I said earlier, it absolutely breaks my heart to see the state of the British military forces. A quick question before we go to a break. How could we have got it so wrong about Russia? Because the information the public's been fed for decades is that they are a bunch of backward commies. They have to queue for bread. They live in poverty. They eat sauerkraut on board their ship. True story. I have tried some. It wasn't very nice back in the 90s. I'm not sure what it's like now. And yeah, actually, in terms of a military force, they are far superior, it appears, than the entire combination of NATO forces. How did we get that so wrong? Or were we just being deliberately lied to?
Well, I think the problem that you have, and I did years ago at the Russian Studies course at Sandhurst, I won't bore anybody with the details of that. But of course, what people can't accept in the West, in America and the Western Europe, is that Russia is no longer the Soviet Union. And when Putin came to power, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and he rejigged the economy. He got rid of the oligarchs. He got rid of a lot of the corruption. And people simply haven't really realized that the Russian Federation is not what it was. It's a massive country with lots and lots of people and with resources to die for. I mean, the resources in Russia are huge. And of course, their industrial complex is capable now of turning out somewhere in the region of 30 times as many missiles, guns, bullets, and 155 millimeter ammunition than the United States. They've got it really, really wrong because they haven't moved on. They've been thinking 25 years ago. And of course, it's the same with the hardware, with the Royal Navy in particular. This is typical of the Royal Navy historically, I'm afraid, fighting the last war. The senior naval officers are always fighting World War II. So they think, we need aircraft carriers, we need cruisers, we need to do this, that, and the other. No, that was very good stuff 100 years ago, or 50 or 60 years ago. That isn't what you need now. Drones, you need drones, ship-to-shore drones. Submarines, of course, are still a very, very important piece of kit, and they work. But aircraft carriers, absolutely ludicrous. They go to the bottom with 2,000 men on it in no time at all.
And I've got to say, I'm quite surprised that Hezbollah or the Houthis or even Hamas hasn't taken a pot shot at the US aircraft carrier. It's the Dwight D. Eisenhower, the oldest of all the US aircraft carriers in operation, that sat in the Med or the Red Sea or wherever it is in that region. I'm surprised that hasn't been attacked and maybe targeted to send down to Davies Locker, Godfrey. We're going to go to a quick break right now, and then when we come back, we're going to carry on talking about our politicians. I want to know your opinion on the Wellingborough, in particular the Wellingborough by-election, but there was another one as well in Kingswood in which the Conservatives suffered very, very badly. So please stay right with us here.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based. And I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.